Hello and welcome to Tax Vibe, a podcast by the Tax Institute, where we peel back the layers of the Australian tax world. I'm John Story, Tax Counsel at the Tax Institute, and for today's episode, we're going to do things a little differently. Today, we are talking about microcredentials, a relatively new but rapidly growing mode of learning. We will be interviewing leading Australian microcredentials expert Deb Friel, who has extensive experience in the development of micro-credential courses for industry within higher education settings. What's different today, though, is that I'll be stepping away from the mic and making way for our guest host, Murray Cassar, Executive General Manager, Education and Commercial at the Tax Institute, who has an in-depth knowledge of education at the Tax Institute. So without further ado, I'll let Murray and Deb start their conversation.
Thanks for that warm welcome, John, and hi, Deb. Welcome to TaxBite.
Thanks, Murray.
Today, we're talking about micro-credentials and their role in educating professionals across a range of career disciplines, particularly in tax. The Tax Institute offers micro-credentials through our Tax Academy program, and the practitioners who have undertaken them so far certainly seem to value them as a path to further education. And today, Deb and I are going to unpack why. But before we start, and we get into all of that information, let's begin with the fundamentals. What exactly is a micro-credential, Deb, for anyone out there who isn't familiar with this term, and how are they different from a traditional education or course?
Great question. Yes, so micro-credentials are literally just a short form of education that is assessed and certified, and then can lead to other qualifications. But more importantly, it demonstrates what your knowledge and your skills are. It differs from a normal degree type qualification in that it's not part of the AQF or the Australian Qualifications Framework, so it's not an award with a degree or a diploma as such, but it is a short form piece of education that can lead on to other bigger, better things.
Yeah, so on the award bit at the moment, I know there's some conversation that's happening within the government and with tax around potentially looking at micro-credentials leading to an award in the future. Have you got any insights around what that could look like potentially?
Absolutely, but they already exist. So the federal government did have a pilot program for micro-credentials a few years ago, looking exactly at that. What are the opportunities to build these smaller type qualifications for professionals that would lead to a further qualification? So that work is already underway, and many organisations, industry and universities are doing exactly that. The problem that we have in Australia is we don't have a clear definition on the volume of learning or volume of hours for a micro-credential. So at the moment, that's to our advantage because we can build a micro-credential at any size. And then it's a matter of negotiating and collaborating with a higher education institution for credit pathways.
Yeah, great. Now, it's definitely something that we're looking into as well at the Tax Institute. Now, I understand your background and you have extensive experience in the development of micro-credential courses for industry within the higher education setting. When and where were you first drawn to work in the field of micro-creds, and how did you discover them, and what was your first micro-credential related role?
It was a very interesting trajectory, actually. I had started as an academic in the School of Nursing, building courses for nurses as a re-entry pathway back to working in industry after they'd lost their registration, either through having a child or helping the husband with a business or just taking a break. They had to demonstrate their evidence of knowledge in order to gain a re-registration. And then I realised at that point that all health disciplines under APRA were in the same boat. They had to have this annual evidence of training or CPD to be able to continue to have a registration certificate. So I proposed it to the university at the time that this was a business opportunity, and that's how the business developed. So we developed a small business within the university designed specifically to build CPD for health. And then, of course, other faculties came on board, like accounting, like engineering, paramedic science, law, all said, well, hey, we need the same thing. So then the centre expanded and we became the site to build short courses or professional development for our graduates specifically, and then our industry beyond that. Then that evolved as micro-credentials became a term in Australia, and I saw the real benefit of relabeling them as micro-credentials, and they were recognised more as the shorter form education, and attach it with a badge, which is verified evidence of what you've done, which means that professional associations then recognised that because it wasn't just a piece of paper, it was a digital badge. And so from there, the business boomed. And we worked with every faculty and every discipline across the university. And at the end of my time at CQU, we had over 200 micro credentials on offer to professional partners, industry, and our students.
Yeah, great. So you mentioned CPD there, which is obviously very relevant for the tax profession. Do you see micro credentials as a key tool to help professionals in gaining CPD?
Oh, absolutely. I think it is the major tool. It's a metric on its own. A micro credential comes with all of the metadata that describes what you've done as a learner. How many hours? What did I do? What did I gain? What can I do? Who is it relevant for? And so all of that becomes what the accrediting agencies are seeking in looking at the evidence behind CPD. So the two are married, really, in my book. It's a perfect match for that. And then it also provides you with a stepping stone onto other qualifications if you want to pursue that.
Yeah, yeah, it's certainly what we're seeing as well at the Tax Institute. Now, why might somebody, whether they're a tax professional, learning and development manager, or a business leader, choose to study a micro credential course rather than taking the traditional path of enrolling in, say, a degree? And what are the advantages of micro credential learning compared to traditional learning?
Great, Murray. It really depends on the learner and what the learner's goals are as far as a career. We do know now from anecdotal evidence that a person's likely to have more than 7 careers in a lifetime. I'm a great example of that. I've just had such an interesting trajectory across my career. It's short form learning. So if you don't have the time or the money to invest in a 4-year degree and you want to do just in time learning just about that one thing, then micro credentials are for you. If you're looking to become a professional registered like an accountant, like a nurse, then of course you have to do a full degree. I don't think that system will ever change. But what has changed is the advancing technology and knowledge while you're doing that degree. So as you're doing your accounting degree or your nursing degree or your law degree, by the time you've finished, what you learnt in first year may not exist. So micro credentials provide what I call a co-curricular training model where you can learn the changes in technology, digital advancement, AI as you go through your degree. But why would you choose specifically a micro credential? Maybe because you already have a degree, or maybe because there's just that one little piece of knowledge that you need to have, or you're seeking a job that seeks just that skill. Then micro credentials are definitely a perfect fit for that type of learner.
Yeah, it's really interesting, isn't it? Because, like I say, there's that kind of that specialized learning that you can obtain, competency-based education, which is relevant at that time. And because things are changing so often, that micro-credential can fill that gap. And through our Tax Academy micro-credential offering, we're seeing professionals and businesses of all sizes and in various fields choose microcreds to develop skills and skill sets in that really targeted way that you just talked about. And they're filling gaps in their existing knowledge or upskilling in really specific niche areas that have become part of practice in tax professionals. That makes a lot of sense for industries like tax, where there are so many specializations. And like we just alluded to, there's that constantly changing environmental legislation that you need to be across. And a traditional education program doesn't really meet that use case. Do you think that the targeted subject matter characteristic of a micro credential makes that? And do you think that aligns with the way that professionals are learning today?
It totally does. And micro credentials offer a very unique way of learning because you can have an asynchronous micro credential where you learn at your own pace online, or you can have it as a synchronous, which is a facilitated program with, say, a moderator or a teacher. You can do it online, you can do it offline, you can do it on site. The beauty of micro credentials, though, and I think you touched on this, was the breadth of knowledge that you can gain in short bursts as a suite is, a series of micro credentials around a cluster, if you like, on a topic or an area of interest. But then you can stack them one on top of another as recognition towards something else. And I think that's the pathway Australia is going to be taking in the future. We touched on that a little earlier. But for a professional in Sydney may have a distinct body of knowledge, which could be very different to someone from, say, Townsville. And so micro credentials offer them the opportunity to just take the bits that they need to meet their knowledge gaps or to pursue the career of their choice or to tailor it to their business needs. whether it's a mum and dad business, whether it's an individual doing bookkeeping, whether it's corporation, or, in my area, I work in a CRC. All of those people have to have a certain level of knowledge, but their knowledge may be very vast. So they can pick and choose what they need. They can develop their own suite, or they can stack it so that they meet a certain qualification requirement. So yeah, I think it's very, 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 very relevant for the professional in today's society.
Yeah, and I think stacking's a really good point that you've got there, because if you think about micro credentials and you can sort of level them up and go through different stages as part of your learning. And we're currently looking at the stackability of our suite micro credential courses at the moment, and we've built stacks that focus around specializations. So we can be a CGT stack or an income tax stack, for example. But we've also got the pathways to use micro credentials to obtain the CTA designation. And it's a really interesting way because it provides that kind of fully flexible way for students to be able to learn and learn at their own place, at their own pace, at their own place. Do you see that as a key advantage of micro credentials as well?
Absolutely. Absolutely, I do. So the idea of stacking, and again, it's that specialization. We no longer just are accountants, or we're no longer just nurses. There are so many different specialty streams and different job opportunities that you need to tailor that. And micro credentials offer you that opportunity. But at the same time, you still need a qualification. So if you can tailor your needs to that specialization and stack accordingly, then you're ahead of the game. The other side of it is, if you're an existing professional and you really want to showcase that you know something better than the other person going for the same job, the micro credential with the verified evidence of your skill set really makes you stand out as a candidate next to someone who doesn't have that. So I think we need to flip our thinking on what it means to get a qualification and get a job. Doesn't work like that anymore. You have to keep the job, you have to keep up with the job, and you have to constantly be learning and expanding your knowledge pool, and micro credentials provide you the opportunity to do that.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point as well. And a couple of years ago, if we look back at education, and MOOCs became a big thing. I think even probably before COVID, and there's the whole idea of learning online, and there are LinkedIn Learning, and there are all these providers that are providing micro credential style courses. Do you think that's going to be the future of learning, or do you think that the blended sort of micro learning along with that traditional education, higher education, university type learning is the way that people will learn into the future and use that for development?
Yeah, look, I think MOOCs are a thing of the past. They were a learning curve for us. I was involved with the first MOOCs way back in the 2010, 2012 era. MOOCs were the stepping stone, or dip your toe into the water to see if people would tolerate this, and some did and some didn't, the online environment. But since that period of time, all universities now have moved into an online teaching format. And it wasn't just because of COVID, although that did help us along a little bit. The micro credentials now, the evolution of micro credentials really has been microscoped in Australia. What we need in micro credentials and what we're seeing is that authentic assessment. So it's not just an online, do a bit of training like LinkedIn Learning and do a quiz and off you go, although you can do that. And some of the early micro credentials that I'm developing in my company are doing exactly that. But then they are scaffolded upwards to more authentic learning. So demonstrate your skill set. Show us how you did that, which is more along the traditional lines of education, in vocational education as well as in higher education. So I think we are a blended mix of that in the micro credential sphere, but in that smaller volume of learning and just in time opportunity. And I think that's where there will always be a relationship with higher education and vocation. And I think we can only build and get better at that. I think in Australia, we need to take some lessons from some of the overseas micro credentials frameworks who are really accelerating the lifelong learning for their citizens. But I think in Australia, we've got so many different tiers of education. It's difficult to bring them all together and say, okay, here's what we're going to do in one rollout. But micro credentials are a disruptor. They are providing opportunities for people to gain education and qualifications and improve their learning while all this other stuff's happening in the background. So for the professional, though, it's a brilliant way of just getting what you need right now, going to a recognized provider and having the verified evidence or the metadata behind what you've done to show this is actually what I learned.
Now, you talk about assessment there briefly. What sorts of types of assessments are you seeing formative and summative within micro credentials to sort of confirm that learner's education?
Yeah, so we use both. Obviously, summative assessment is the essential part of the micro credential. It sort of closes the loop, if you like, on the learner journey. Summative assessment can be a portfolio, it can be a showcase, it can be a video presentation, like go and do a podcast and demonstrate your knowledge. It can be, a written piece of assessment. I think micro credentials are moving well away from exams, and that's that type of thing. Although multiple choice quiz questions can be quite interesting, but also it's the application of your knowledge. So if you're in an industry that is a hands-on, like manufacturing or paramedic science or construction, then you may have a third-party provider, like the vocational education system, who authorises or endorses that yes, this person has been able to demonstrate that they've done X, Y, or Z. In my industry, we're going to be doing work with our plastics providers, up and down, downstream and upstream in the plastic value chain, and we'll be doing industry-based education directly with them. So, your authentic assessment, there are principles around authentic assessment and adult learning, which need to be applied into your micro credential. And the National Micro Credentials Framework provides a good guideline as to how to build those. So long as we're compliant with those, and we are meeting the needs of not just the learner, but the industry who's going to employ that learner. That's the really important thing. What does industry want this learner to know? So, in my role and from my perspective, it's very important when you're building a micro credential that you do it as a co-design with the person who's going to employ the learner at the end of it. And also with the learner, what is the best way to project this learning and what sort of assessment will they appreciate, not just get through, but be able to apply and then take that body of knowledge and apply it in practice when they finished. So it's not just about the person who's building the micro credential or the company, it's about the employer, it's about the workplace, building workforce capacity, but it's also about that learner journey. If the learner likes what they did the first time, they'll come back and do the next one. They'll build their suite or they'll stack their learning, and then they'll be able to improve what they do in their career.
Yeah, and look, we see that as well. And you talk there about different industries as well. And there's a common assumption that tax training is really only relevant to those people that work in tax. But really, if you think about manufacturing, you use that example. In a manufacturer, you've got their finance team, you've got procurement managers, you've got CFO, you've got payroll. All of these people are making decisions every day that have tax implications. How should business leaders be thinking about tax knowledge as an organizational capability for multiple industries, not just that professional specialty for tax professionals?
Yeah, look, I pay tax. I buy products and services from small businesses who have to pay tax. So I think education and around tax in general, and I'm saying tax in general because I know there's multiple specialties. I think it's really relevant for anyone who has a business, whether that's the mum and dad business down the road, or whether that's a small to medium enterprise, whether it's a corporation or a CRC like I am. But I think the point of difference here that you've really touched on is that, a larger corporation has a HR department, a payroll, a procurement. By educating them on the basics or their specialties, they also know each other's work. And I think it's really important that um, anybody who handles money and tax and deals with all of those sorts of things understands that the basic level micro credential could be highly relevant, but they may want to go into some of those specialty areas to learn more about self-managed super funds, for example. So there's a whole cross range of things that people, should be investigating as part of their increasing their learning. And I think that it would be remiss to think that tax education is only for people who manage tax, or for my tax agent. I go to my accountant to get my tax done. But if I have a business, I also need to understand some of those tax implications. And we've seen, with the recent budget and with the change in the global economy, there are so many changes coming that we do need to keep up with it. And if I'm paying my accountant to do my tax, I expect him to keep up with it too. So I think, that's a very broad answer to your question. But I think people need to rethink, is it relevant for me? Yes, it is relevant for you. So I think it's relevant for everyone who's in that industry in general, who has a business, corporation, to also make sure that everyone is across everything that they need to know.
Yeah. Okay. Let's bring it back to the learner for a second because we see that micro credentials aren't just being taken up by grads and emerging professionals at the beginning of their career. I mean, we see this as well at the Tax Institute, but businesses are now also using micro credentials as a sort of internal professional development. And we talked about CPD and that competency based learning. What other types of organizations are you seeing that are adopting micro credential learning for their teams? And what are the advantages of these for both the businesses and for the employees?
Yeah, so just about every industry you can think of does internal training. So a great example is the mining industry. Mining, when a person is a new employee in the mining industry, they go through a series of training modules or standard operating procedures to make sure that they comply with workplace health and safety, that they understand their role descriptions. They are now switching towards using micro credentials because they can then have that verified evidence of learning and they can stack it and they can develop a suite. So it's not just about knowing how to change the oil in a diesel truck. It's about the whole gamut of roles and jobs and things that you need to know for that position. Fitness is another industry that's doing it. I worked with Fitness Australia to help develop micro credentials that met the CPD requirements for fitness professionals. But health is another big one. Internally in health organisations, they're now developing their own micro credentials to meet the needs of those graduates that come out without the skill set that's required immediately when they hit the ground. COVID was a fabulous example of that, upskilling, immediate upskilling. Their manufacturing, the hydrogen sector, all of these things have emerged with such force and so quickly that people needed to go, well, gosh, we need to train everyone about that now. So micro credentials meet that need. The difference between, oh, just go to a training session at lunchtime, sit and listen to someone talk, and doing a micro credential is that you are assessed. They ensure that you understand what you were meant to know in the first instance. But as a learner, you get the evidence. You get the digital badge and you get that verified list of metadata or evidence to showcase what you've done. So when you move to a different job, you can say, well, hey, this is what I did over here. And they go, oh, yeah, that's great. That's awesome. So maybe build on that suite and we can offer you X, Y, and Z. So I think for the learner, it's very important that you curate your own knowledge portfolio, that you're in charge of that because it's you going for the jobs. And in today's market, it's so very competitive. So bringing it back to the learner, I think it's important that the learner understands how it all works.
Yeah. Again, back on the learner for a second, what types of learning activities do you see suit that micro credential style learning? We use case based learning, for example, lots of case studies. We provide sort of interactive ways that they can work with the content and work through the content, and a little bit of gamification as well. But as an adult learner that's going through a micro credential course, how should that content and that learning activity be presented in the best way?
Yeah, so that's another great question. So the micro credentials, there are micro credentials being built by schools now for school kids to scaffold their knowledge and to solidify what they have to have throughout the ACARA curriculum to take into the next part of their learning journey, which might be vocational, might be industry based, or it could be higher education. So, how do you build the micro credential for the adult learner? Well, again, it revolves around what is the industry. If it's the health industry, well, you want them to be able to do what you've asked them to do, not just learn about it. So, you want to be able to demonstrate that capability. So, you might do some online theoretical knowledge, and gamification is great, make it really engaging. You can have what we call a breadth and depth approach. So, the breadth is the beginning part of the topic, and the depth is let's unpack it a little further for those learners who need more. So, meeting the needs of the adult learner in that way is really beneficial. But then translating that into what do I do with that now? How do I apply that in practice may come into your assessment or it may be part of the micro credential. If you're in the manufacturing or construction sector, again, you want to be able to demonstrate that skill. So it's application of what you've learned. It may also be teaching it to someone else. In my early days as a nurse, for example, it was see one, do one, teach one. That's it, and it was so quick. So someone shows you how to do it, then you do it, then you show the next person. Great, you're an expert. So it's a bit of a expansion on that model, I suppose. But for the learner, it really depends who you're pitching to. It's very important when you're building a micro credential to know who your audience is, who your market segment is, and build accordingly and also engage them accordingly. So adult learners vary as much as anybody else. So you have to build whatever your content is around what you're going to be teaching, and then if it's going to have an application side or a hands-on side, build that accordingly as well.
Yeah, yeah. Look, at the tax issue, where we talked before about the verification of the education, we provide digital badges for somebody who's completed a micro-credential unit and has passed through our tax academy program. Are digital badges common in micro-credentials and other sectors? And if not, what other ways are you seeing learners demonstrate their achievements?
Digital badges are absolutely the way forward with micro-credentials, and they are intertwined. Not all digital badges obviously have to be associated with a micro-credential. You can award a digital badge for something else. But to have a badge as an award from a micro-credential really provides that rigor and that credibility around what that student has done. And choosing a badge provider is just as important. So in Australia, we have a range of badge providers, both domestic and international. The common theme underneath all of that is the retention of that metadata and being able to verify that the learner has actually done something that they said they'd done. So digital badges provide that credible verification mechanism for employers or people who want to see what you've learnt. So I do think that badges associated with micro credentials are really essential. But the digital badge is the learners. Hello, look what I've done. It's your flag. It's your demonstration of your competence, which is why I come back to the learner being in charge of their own curated profile, and digital badges offer you the opportunity to do that. If you do a micro credential with an organization and they don't give you anything, when you walk away, you don't have anything. So the badge provides you that showcase, if you like, of how to demonstrate what your skills are.
We encourage our students to write them on their LinkedIn and to put them on their intranet or their internal work profile. Is that the sort of application that you're seeing? Is there something else that you'd recommend?
Yeah, look, you can also put them on your signature block. If you've just gained a skill or a small qualification and you've completed a suite or a stack of micro credentials and it gives you something credible to say, hey, look, I've just learned about this, or I am now an expert in Y, then you can put it into your signature block. And that way it's free marketing. You're sending emails constantly and people are looking and are like, so Deb's just done that. And it doesn't have to be huge. It can be a small thing. Uh, you know, we've developed some training at CQU around gender awareness. And so if you were what we called an ally, you could put that on your signature block so people knew that you were a person that they could go to for peer support or for reference or for information. So it's also a way of showcasing those other soft skills that don't necessarily lead to a career application, but also can promote you as what your whole of person looks like. But certainly, my quals offer digital badges linked to your testament. So when you do gain a qualification, you also have your digital badges that show what you've done in a co-curricular way that does improve your graduate outcome. But LinkedIn, any of those sort of platforms, and we're moving so far away from paper. I still have my folder of qualifications from 20 years ago. I haven't looked at it for 10 years. So the digital curation of your portfolio is very, very important. You can also add them to Seek and job profile places if you're looking for qualifications. But yeah, LinkedIn's my favorite place.
Yeah, and look, do you think employers in the future will be doing things like verifying badges like they would a traditional university degree by using platforms like MyEquals?
Yes, they're doing that now. Yeah, so to be able to verify a competency skill set, so and so can do this with their hands. They've gained this qualification, and they've got a series of micro credentials that demonstrate that they've been able to do this. As long as there's that authentic assessment behind it, but that's what the badge provides you, that list of what the student's done to gain or what they've learnt to gain that micro credential.
Yeah, great. And do you have any case studies or examples of where micro credential graduates have gone on to do something and had great success professionally or academically?
Not something that's majorly profound, but certainly I was involved with a project where we were building the capacity of nurses in managerial positions. Um, these nurses didn't have the time, the money, or the ability to just go straight into a postgraduate qualification, but still needed to build their skill set to build the capacity of the organisation that we were working with. So we took the end qualification, the graduate certificate, we broke it down into micro-credentials, and we offered that as online training and on-site training to a group of 20 nurses who then decided themselves, do you want to take what you've learned here and get credit into the higher degree qualification? And half of them did. And that's a number that the university would never have seen previously had they not done it through that way. So it was a very, very curated and easy pathway for these nurses to follow to get a qualification. Fitness is another example. We've developed a whole range of micro-credentials for Fitness Australia, and we developed them for kids at school to do to understand what the role is, which then incentivise them to take up that career pathway. We've done the same with manufacturing, taking manufacturing qualifications and hydrogen micro-credentials into high schools so that we can incentivise these kids to go, oh, I'd like to be an engineer, or I'd like to follow that career trajectory, so that we can meet the workforce skill needs as we progress.
Yeah, I know earlier we talked about the sort of the length of what a micro credential could be, and I know it's a bit of an open question. You could be anything from 1 hour to 100 hours, but what do you think the sweet spot is for the amount of time a micro credential should be?
Again, it depends on who your learner is and what your industry is. I know I'm not answering your question very clearly, but to be honest, I think 4 hours is a good sweet spot. It's not too long that people lose interest in what they're supposed to be doing or feel, oh, I'm enrolled in a course. It's going to take me forever. 4 hours, you can sit in a couple of sittings and get it done. Um, Over that, you have to be very creative as to how you build your micro credentials. So it would be more like an online course from a university or a unit where you would see week 1, week 2, or blocks of study. You can still do it like that. But so long as it is built or created in such a way that it's easy enough for the student to proceed through. But I think between 4 and 20 hours is the sweet spot. Anything over and above that, you're really branching out into other topics. It should be another micro credential that you can stack or that you can add as part of a suite. Um, then you have to think about what you're going to do with that micro credential. Do you want it to be credit bearing into a qualification, or is it just a standalone topic? So my short answer would be somewhere between 4 and 20 hours. I think once you get up beyond that scope, you're heading more into award qualifications and the like. But that's purely from my perspective in the industry I'm working in at the moment.
Yeah, I tend to agree. And the research that we did when looking at our own micro-credential program was similar. And our micro-credential program through using tax academies, somewhere between 8 to 12 hours of learning that we see. And some people are sort of, if they're a little bit more experienced, they might be down towards that 8, where the grads might be up towards that 12. But we found that to be the real sweet spot for our learners and for the amount of content and the technical nature of the content that the tax tends to be. Final question, Deb, whether someone's an individual thinking about their own development or a business leader and considering upskilling for their team via microcreds, what's your key piece of advice to them to make sure that their learning leads to success?
Know what you're buying or know what you're studying would be my first piece of advice. So micro credentials can be offered by anybody really, industry wise. Make sure it aligns with what your outcomes are, what your career progression pathway looks like for you. Um, my advice is try one. They're short, they're affordable, they do meet a need. Go through the process, experience it as a user, and take the benefits. Claim the badge, share the badge, and then look at that from a career perspective. And I think we've moved from like I think I started this. We moved from a mindset of I'm going to have this career and I'm going to just do that for the rest of my life. It's never going to be like that. Even if you are in one career, that career knowledge base is going to expand exponentially while you're in it. So we have to have the mindset that we're going to be continuously learning. So the advice is to go out and explore what there is available, to think about what your options are, just try it. And if you're in the tax field in any way, shape, or form, whether you're an individual or a corporation, consider it as an opportunity for training for yourself or your staff that meets your needs instantly, really. So I think it's about trying and exploring what the options are and becoming familiar with micro credentials in the education sphere as in general.
That was amazing, Deb. Thank you so much for your insights today. It really was fascinating to hear your perspective and learn from your experience. Really appreciate your time today. And we'll love to, I can't wait to see you again.
Thanks, Murray. It's been a pleasure as always. It's always good to talk about micro-credentials and to see an industry with such passion and enthusiasm for training their professional networks. I wish you all the very best. Thank you.
Over to you, John. Thanks again.
Hi listeners, you've just been hearing Murray Cassar, Executive General Manager, Education and Commercial at the Tax Institute, chat with Deb Friel, Micro-Credential Manager at Solving Plastic Waste, CRC. If you enjoyed today's discussion, there's more just like it coming to Tax Vibe throughout the year. Subscribe, rate and review Tax Vibe wherever you listen to keep up to date with us. If you're interested in being at the centre of the tax conversation, a membership with the Tax Institute is just what you need. Stay current and connected with tangible real-world benefits. Learn more at taxinstitute.com.au. Thanks again, and we'll see you next time.